Hello guys, and welcome to the next episode and installment of our Das Werk Panther build. And today we are going to tackle the tracks. And this time we are going to do something special or out of the ordinary. We are going to use the Ammo of Mick weathering set for dry earth tracks. And we will go through all of the steps within. But before we can of course start, we had to prime the tracks, and I primed them with the one-shot primer from Ammo, which is the same stuff as the ultimate primer or the primer from Badger, the Steinol-Res. And I primed them off camera so that now we can basically go through all of the 5 steps of weathering that we get provided in this weathering set by Ammo of Mick. I wanted to test out whether or not I was happy with the results you got if you followed the non-existent instructions, but the logical way through this kit. I also painted these tracks with German Chem Black Brown, but since I then bought this weathering set, we are going to paint over the top of this. But that should not be a problem. So let me once again show you the contents of this weathering set before we get started. We start out with the Rust Tracks acrylic paint, and after that we will add a wash and pigments. But first off, let's get going with the rust paint. I thin my paints with Ultimate Airbrush Thinner, and for airbrushing I use my trusty Harder Steenbeck Infinity. I have no clue which or what PSI my compressor is at. I just spray everything through the same pressure. So maybe that's wrong, but I still do it that way. And we are just going to apply this paint, thinner to paint ratio, roughly 70 to 30. 70 paint, 30 thinner. Properly thin the paint, and then just apply the Rust Tracks tone over the entire track run. Normally I would be wearing gloves, but I was lazy and didn't want to get the gloves from under my bench. Now we tackle the second track run, same procedure, no difference. What I will be doing in this video, however, is I will leave one of the tracks in this Rust track tone while I do weather the other tracks, so you guys can always see the difference and the way the different steps actually change the look of the tracks. So just so you know, one of the tracks will be weathered within this video, the other one will not be. It will be left in this track color Rust track. So here we are. Both track runs are now more or less painted. Be careful to paint them from both angles and both sides, otherwise it will look weird if one half of them is still black. So here we are. The tracks are now painted, and the next step will be the good old trusty track wash. I have been using track wash before. If not from Ammo, I used it from AK, and I don't think that the difference between these two products is that big. I think it's basically the same color wash that you use here. So I don't think you can go wrong with this. I love this product. It's just so simple to add shadows and darker rust areas to your tracks. Of course, you want to use something to protect your cutting mat from the wash, so I take a piece of cartonnage here. Just take an old large brush, because if you use a small brush it will take you forever, and the one that I'm using here is too small, so it took me forever. And just sludge on the wash. And here you can see me actually changing the brush to a bigger brush, cleaning the small brush, taking out a big brush, and then here we go, bigger brush, and now we go ham on this track run. Try to spread the wash. This is not like a pin wash where you want to only highlight the details, but this is just so you can have shadows and darker rust patches all over the track. So don't need to be too careful with this. Just don't try to make your cutting mat look like a massacre happened there earlier this day. I want to also say thank you to those people who left a nice comment after I had to go to the hospital last weekend. I am now back home. I'm doing okay. My heart checked out fine. I just have to lose some weight and change my diet a bit. So that's basically the outcome of last week. And so thank you again if you thought of me, if you left a message. I appreciate that very much. Of course, you should not forget about the inside of your track. Otherwise, that would look weird. Always clean your brush with some white spirit or odorless turpentine or thinner or whatever they call it. All the companies have different names for the product. And here we are. The track run has now been washed, basically. And let me now show you a comparison between the track with the wash on it and the track without the wash on it. You can see it just basically looks like it's wet, but actually shadows will occur once it's dry, especially on the inside of those cleats there within the tracks. And this is something that is just a nice touch. Next up, we will now be in the unenviable position to add mud and dust to our tracks. And for that, this weathering set provides us with some splash mud and some pigment. So let's take a look at the splash mud. I've never used this product before, and I can already tell you the way I used it is probably not the way they intend it's to be used. But the thing is, when I hear splash, I think, yeah, just put it on a brush and then just splash it on. But the results were lacking. I didn't really love the result. And as you can see, you cannot see a lot here. And the one thing that I have to figure out or point out here, the tracks were not yet dry. And you can see in some areas the wash isn't dry, which probably also didn't help. But for some weird reason, it's just not doing what I had hoped it would do. Actually create some nice splashes. It's just some blobs here and there that didn't really do it for me. I don't know. And then I wanted to check whether or not there was an instruction as to how to use this weathering set on the internet, because there's no instruction within this set. And there's none. I couldn't find any. I couldn't find any on Ammo's YouTube page, especially sad because Ammo has recently only uploaded videos in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish at all. So yeah, it's just I have to figure out how to use this properly in the future. Maybe it's more like a pin wash that you have to add this to only the areas where you really want it to be. But then why call it splashes? Because splashes I do here with a cocktail stick and just splash them on. course, you want to cover your bench with some paper towel because this stuff gets everywhere and you don't want it to either ruin your bench or some models standing by. So here I am taking some of it off of the top surfaces, or especially taking off some of the bigger blobs with some white spirit, because this is an enamel product, so you can blend them, but you got to be careful that you don't leave like big blobby marks all over your tracks, especially on the top surfaces here. I really wasn't too hyped with that product, to be honest, but that might be me misusing it. So next up, pigments. And as you can see here, you can actually see some of the splashes left on the tracks. And like I said, it's nothing to call home about. It's just weird looking. But now we're adding the pigments just onto the dry tracks here. There's no fixer on the tracks. I will be using fixer in a bit, and I did this off camera, and you will see what happened. And I really was distraught after I added the fixer. I'm just doing this in a random pattern. I don't want every track length to be covered in the same amount of dust. So here and there we add a bit more, and then we take it off and rub it in and blend it. This, of course, is a time-consuming job if you do this link by link, but I think the results actually speak for themselves. And you can actually see how the tracks kind of come to life once you add this pigment, the dust. Of course, some pigment will fall onto the lower track half, but that's not a problem because you want to have some dust inside. But you don't want it to be as much as on the outside because the road wheels would take lots of it off again. So try to focus the dust on the outside of the track. And of course, I left out the underside because this model, when we're standing on a base, you won't be able to see underneath the tracks. So no need for mud underneath on the underside. I just do the front and the back where you can see it if it's standing on a base, but I won't do the underneath because time, and I'm lazy. Yeah, I have to admit I'm lazy. I actually like the look, like the tone of this pigment a lot, and very nice dense pigment, but very fine at the same time, so you can actually do quite a lot with them. There you go. See me doing it randomly, trying to have different gradients of dust and different hotspots of dust, basically, where there's more and then there's less in other areas. Yeah, we get out of shot. I'm sorry for that. Of course, don't forget about the sides of the tracks. They would also get dusty, especially if the vehicle stood somewhere for a day or two in the steppe of Russia or maybe in Italy. There's a lot of dust in the air, so they would get dusty. I'm about to have dinner here. I'm rather hungry. I'm looking forward. We are having fish tonight with some rice and some vegetables. So we're looking forward to that. So here we are continuing with our track run. And this is a very, very deliberate task, and it takes a while. And when you do this like this and you take your time, and then something happens that you did not foresee happening and you did not actually want happening, trust me, the feeling that you get after that is one of utter hatred toward the product that you used. Here I am adding pigments to the inside of the track with a bigger brush because this time I don't need to be as careful. I made the mistake of using Pigment Fixer in the next step, and you will see the results of the Pigment Fixer in just a bit. And I have no idea why the Pigment Fixer did this. Normally when you use Pigment Fixer over dry pigments, it just sticks them to the model and then it just dries and your pigments do not change in color. For whatever reason, the pigments turned basically into dark mud pigments even with the Pigment Fixer dry. So I have no idea why that happened. All I know is that I'm really not happy about it. And here we are, done with the track run. And like with the wash, we will now take a closer look at both track runs next to each other so you can actually see the differences. On the right side, you can see the plain rust colored track. And on the left hand side here we have the nicely dusted and muddied up track. I decided that before I can add the metal paint to the top surface of the cleats of the track, I need to fix the pigments in place, otherwise they will fall off. So I used the 502 Abteilung or 501 Abteilung, I don't know, the pigment fixer. And I didn't film it. Luckily for me and luckily for you guys, because I really was angry with what happened. And I just spread it over the top. Here we have it. That's the pigment fixer, 502 Abteilung. And I spread it over the top with a big brush. I didn't use any big time movement or anything. It's just pour it over the top basically and just have them fixed in place. Because I really like the look of the tracks as they are right now. Nice, dusty, dry, muddy tracks. And this is what happened. Now they look like this. They look wet and dark muddy. And even after waiting even more time, they didn't lighten up. And it didn't lose this sheen of, I don't know, gloss. And I have no clue whatsoever why this happened. All I knew was, okay, I will have to go over the top of those tracks with the pigment again, because I cannot leave it like this. Let's do it differently this time around. Let's first add the metal paint, then go over the top with the light pigments again, and then just leave them the way they are. The model won't be moved much once it's on the base anyways, so the pigments won't fall off. Just let it sit like this then. And I really was angry with the pigment fixer, and you can see, look at the difference. Just remember the way the tracks look 20 seconds ago in the video, and now you have this. This has nothing to do with dry, muddy, dusty tracks anymore. This looks like muddy tracks in Russia during early winter or in the fall. This is not a dry, muddy, dusty track anymore. And here we are now adding the metal paint over the top of the surfaces. Try to dry brushing this. So I put some paint on the brush and then take it off on the paper towel, as you can see here, because I don't want to paint the tracks. I just want the highlights and top surfaces to catch the paint. And this actually makes a difference, and I think it looks nice. I'm just still not happy with the way the tracks look overall because they are way too dark. Thanks to the pigment fixer for some weird reason. Also, keep in mind you have to do the outside of your tracks here, because those outside parts of the tracks would be in contact with stones and dirt and all kinds of things all the time. And the guide horns, of course, those would come in contact with the road wheels and be basically bare metal and polished metal, so they need some of the metal paint too. And now for our final look at the weather tracks. Here we are back again, comparing the weather tracks on the left hand side to the only Dave's painted tracks on the right hand side. You can see it lightened up a bit once the pigment fixer totally dried, but it's still not in no way, shape, or form close to the way they looked before I added the pigment fixer. Again, let me recap what we did. We painted them in rust color, then we added the track wash, then we added the dry step mud splashes over the top that I'm not sure worked out. Then we added the pigment, North Africa dust. Then we fixed those pigments in place. And then last but not least, we dry brushed the metal paint over the top surfaces. And here you can see this is what the tracks look inside. And I might be adding some more light pigments here to the top. Although I have to say now, the way they look now, they look okay-ish. But I like the way they looked before the pigment fixer a bit more. So maybe I'll add some more pigments. So what I want to say about the ammo weathering set is I would really appreciate the fact if they had included an instruction, because especially for the splashes. So this should be it for this episode. We have now done the tracks. The other one I did off camera, so they can now be mounted to the Panther. Next up, finishing the Panther. Thanks guys. I'll see you soon. So I'm modeling. Bye for now.